No ranch was a sprawling kingdom of snow and silence carved out of the vast, unforgiving winter landscape. Fresh blanket of white covered everything, muffling the world in a profound quiet. The fence posts capped with snow stretched toward a horizon that was a blur of gray and white. His house, a solid structure of timber and stone, stood as a quiet sentinel against the endless sky, a single wreath on the door, the only acknowledgement of the Christmas season. Inside, the rooms were clean and sparse, filled with the scent of leather, woods, and a loneliness so deep it had settled into the very grain of the floorboards. He was a man people in town respected but didn't know, a silhouette under a dark brown cowboy hat. He had built this ranch with another man whose laughter had once filled these empty spaces, but that was a lifetime ago. Now the silence was his only companion. This year he hadn't even bothered with a tree. That night the sky unleashed a blizzard. Snow fell not in flakes but in a solid windrift curtain that erased the world. The storm was a wild, angry thing, and John had been sitting in his worn leather armchair by the fireplace, watching the flames dance as the wind howled. He was accustomed to these nights, quiet, predictable, and isolated. The phone on the side table was a silent, useless block. No one ever called. Then a sound cut through the roar of the wind, faint and desperate, a soft, frantic knocking. He dismissed it as the wind throwing ice against the siding, but it came again. Clearer this time, 3 thuds, almost lost in the gale, but undeniably human. John frowned, a deep line forming between his brows. He pushed himself out of the chair, his boots making a soft thud on the wooden floor as he moved to the front door. When he pulled it open, the blizzard surged in, bringing with it a blast of frigid air and a sight that would forever alter the silent landscape of his life. A young man no more than 20 stood shivering on his porch, half covered in snow. His dark hair was matted with ice and his thin jacket was useless against the cold. He clutched worn backpack to his chest as if it were a life raft in a frozen sea. His lips were blue and he trembled violently as he lifted his chin to meet John's gaze. His voice a ragged whisper, "Excuse me, sir, I saw your barn. I was wondering, can I sleep in your barn tonight, just until the storm passes?" John froze, the stoic rancher in his warm, dry house, staring down at a young man who looked like he was moments from collapsing. His mind struggled to process the request. Strangers didn't come knocking on his door, not out here, not in a blizzard like this. He should have said yes to the barn, or maybe no altogether. It was the safe, simple thing to do, but looking into those wide, desperate eyes, he heard himself say something else entirely, the words surprising even him. "No, you belong inside." The young man blinked, his ice-caked lashes fluttering, as if he couldn't have heard correctly. John stepped aside, holding the door open wider. The warmth and light from the house spilled onto the porch. The young man stumbled cautiously over the threshold, leaving a trail of melting snow on the floor. John shut the door and the roar of the storm was instantly muffled, replaced by the crackling of the fire and the sudden awkward silence between them. He turned to the young man, who was hugging his backpack so tightly it looked like the only thing keeping him from falling apart. He looked impossibly small and out of place in the vastness of the entryway. "What's your name?" John asked, his voice softer than usual. "Rowan," the young man replied, his voice cracking. "Just Rowan." He looked down at the puddle forming around his feet, a flush of shame coloring his pale cheeks. "Come on, Rowan, let's get you dry," John said. He led him into the living room and grabbed a thick wool blanket, draping it over Rowan's shaking shoulders. For the first time in a decade, John felt a presence in his home. That wasn't a ghost, it was real, raw and trembling by his fire. As Rowan huddled near the hearth, John's mind churned. Why was this kid out here alone on a night like this, so close to Christmas? Something held him back from asking. The boy's eyes were too tired for an interrogation. Instead, he sat in the armchair opposite him, the silence stretching between them. It was a different kind of silence now, not empty but filled with unspoken questions and a fragile shared humanity. In that quiet room with the blizzard Raging outside, John realized his house no longer felt merely empty, felt like it had been waiting. John leaned back in his leather chair, studying the young man across from him. Rowan sat hunched, enveloped in the blanket, the firelight flickering across his face. You hungry? John's voice was a low rumble. I can make you something. Rowan's head lifted, his expression a mixture of surprise and disbelief. He gave the smallest of nods. Yes, please. The words were so soft, so tentative, they told John this young man wasn't used to being offered anything. John made his way to the kitchen and soon returned with a steaming bowl of stew and a mug of hot chocolate. He set them on the low table in front of Rowan. It's not much, but it's hot. Rowan stared at the food as if it were a miracle. He ate with a quiet hunger that spoke of missed meals and long cold days. Between sips of cocoa, he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. My dad, he loves Christmas. Big sermons about love and family. Bitter irony laced his words. John listened, not wanting to interrupt the fragile thread of conversation. Why were you out there in the storm, Rowan? Rowan's gaze dropped to the floor. My family, they found out I'm gay, he said. The word quietly, testing it in the unfamiliar room. My dad, he's a pastor, he said. He said I had brought shame to the family, that a house of God couldn't have someone like me in it. Especially not at Christmas. His voice faltered and a single tear traced a path down his cheek. He told me to pack a bag and leave. My mom, she just stood there and cried. She slipped me $50 and told me to be safe. He sniffled, the sound raw and painful. So I left. I've been on the road for a few days. I thought maybe your barn would be dry enough. I wouldn't have bothered you. The simple, devastating story hit John with the force of a physical blow. A barn, this child, because he was just a child in so many ways, had been cast out by his own family during Christmas and was asking for nothing more than the shelter of a barn. John swallowed hard, a cold anger mixing with a deep aching sympathy. He thought of his own past, of the love he had kept hidden from a world that wouldn't understand. You don't belong in a barn, John said, his voice firm but gentle. You're safe here inside. Row finally looked up, his eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. He seemed to be searching John's face for a trick, for the catch. Finding none, he gave a small, trembling nod. What they did to you, that wasn't right, John said quietly. Love is never a source of shame. For a moment, Rowan just stared at him, his expression a mixture of shock and a fragile, dawning hope. It was as if no one had ever said those words to him before. Rowan, you can stay here through the storm, and after, you'll be warm, you'll be safe. Tomorrow we'll figure things out. Rowan's lips parted, a shaky breath escaping. He just whispered, okay. It was a small word, but within it John heard trust, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt the silence in his house begin to change. It was no longer hollow, it was the quiet beginning of something he couldn't yet name. He led Rowan to the guest room, a room that hadn't been used in over a decade. As John stood in the doorway watching the steady rise and fall of Rowan's breathing in the clean sheets, he was struck by a profound realization. For all his land, for all his independence, he had never truly given anyone a home. That began tonight with a whispered request on his doorstep. In the middle of a blizzard, the days that followed settled into a gentle, unspoken rhythm. The blizzard had trapped them, blanketing the ranch several feet of snow and cutting them off from the rest of the world. Rowan, it turned out, was a quiet but steady presence. He helped with the winter chores without being asked, breaking ice in the water troughs and helping John ensure the animals were warm and fed in the cavernous barn. One afternoon, a crisis struck. One of the older Mars went into a difficult labor. For hours they worked together in the cold barn, their breath plumbing in the air under the stark glow of a single bulb. Rowan was a calming presence, murmuring soft words to the distressed animal. By the time a small shaky foe was finally born, they were both exhausted, standing side by side watching the newborn take its first wobbly steps. A new, deeper bond had been forged between them. That evening they sat by the fire of the house, Warm and quiet against the whistling wind, Rowan was sketching in a small notebook, a surprising skill John had discovered he possessed. Do you ever think about going back? John asked. Quietly, Rowan was silent for a long moment. I think about my mom, he admitted, but I can't go back to him. I'll always be something that needs to be fixed. I can't live like that. He finally looked at John, his eyes holding a deep, vulnerable honesty. The thing he doesn't get is that loving a man feels as natural to me as breathing. It's not a choice, it's just my heart. Noah's own heart gave a painful throb. He owed this boy the whole truth, the person I lost. John began, his voice rough with emotion. His name was Samuel. We built this ranch together. We lived here for 15 years. He wasn't just my partner. Business. He paused, then said the words that had been locked away for a decade. I loved him. Rowan's head snapped toward him, his eyes wide with surprise, then softening with a profound dawning understanding. Oh, he breathed. He died in an accident, John continued, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. After he was gone, I just closed myself off. It was easier than facing the questions from people in town. It was easier to be alone. He finally met Rowan's gaze. So when you talk about your heart, I understand. Tears welled in Rowan's eyes. I'm so sorry, John. Don't be, John said, a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in 10 years, I feel like someone really sees me. In that moment, the final wall between them crumbled. They were two souls who understood each other's hidden pain. The conversation turned to the future. Rowan spoke of his fear of having no family, no anchor. I don't know where I belong, he whispered. John looked at him, then out at the vast snow-covered land visible through the window. He thought of the empty rooms, of the silence he had once mistaken for peace. He knew what he had to do. He turned to Rowan, his expression serious. A home isn't just roof over your head, Rowan. It's about finding your family, whether it's the one you were born into or not. He took a deep breath. I'm getting older and I don't have anyone to leave this place to. This ranch, it needs a future. It needs life. He paused, his voice steady. And sure, I want to adopt you. I want to give you my name, make you my son. I want this to be your home for good. Rowan stared at him, his mouth falling open. Tears streamed freely down his face, tears of shock and overwhelming gratitude. You would do that, he stammered. For me, I would, John said, his own eyes glistening. You walked into my life in the middle of a blizzard, but you brought the warmth back with you, kid. You've made this place a home again. Rowan launched himself into John's arms, hugging him with a desperate strength. John held him tight, the awkwardness he once felt replaced by a fierce, protective love. He was no longer just a lonely cowboy. He was a father. On Christmas morning, they woke to a world of brilliant white. The storm having finally passed, for the first time in years, John went out to the barn and cut boughs from a pine tree, bringing the scent of Christmas into the house. They were no longer two strangers brought together by chance. They were a family forged not by blood, but by kindness, acceptance, and the shared understanding of what it meant to finally truly belong. Noah's quiet ranch was silent no more. It was filled with the sound of a home reborn.